what's an app that a bunch of people are using that's kind of being somewhat respectful of this? Is there anything that you think is kind of doing it right?
There's all sorts of different examples. I mean, I try not to have time well spent represent like the Barber's organic food store of like cool like, organic apps. But,
right.
Like things like Calendly, for example, helps people, when you schedule a meeting, you normally send 6 emails back and forth and no, that time doesn't work. And
right.
people forget to ask which day they'd like to meet. They just say, yeah, I'd like to meet.
Right.
All this kind of stuff. So Calendly lets someone else schedule blocks of time on your calendar in a kind of a deliberate way. You pay for it, and it saves people time, and they spend more time living and less time scheduling, and they charge for it. That's one example of a time well spent thing. Things like Flux take the blue light out of your screen, which adds about 15 minutes of quality sleep per night per person who uses it.
Yeah.
You have Flux installed?
I do. Well, I have one of them installed that does darken. I don't know if it's Flux, but something does
like
darken
that.
my screen in the evening. Yeah.
Right. And so you view that as like that's adding 15 minutes of quality sleep to your life. So you know there's a delivered benefit phenomenologically in your life because of using that thing.
Yeah.
There's a thing called 1 second every day that instead of posting to social media in this sort of open-ended way, you just like capture 1 second of your life, and then at the end of a year, it just like compiles all that together into this one big memory reel. So you can think of that as reorganizing all these little blocks of time you might spend capturing selfies in your life, in your day, and looking through them all the time, to suddenly having just one big block at the end where you see them.
Yeah.
So part of this is just reorganizing these little blocks of time into something that adds up that's better.
How much for the amount that you care about this is a sort of split between happiness and productivity? Because a lot of what you described there was like productivity related, but there is an ancillary happiness because the more clean you are.
This is about
in productivity. You can be happier.
This is about life.
Yeah.
I mean, this is about like what is time well spent for us in our lives?
Yeah.
Like meaning for democracy, like what is the part of your life that's dedicated to being informed or to having conversations?
Yeah.
I can imagine thousands of disempowering ways. If I could like puppeteer your life, I can imagine like really disempowering ways for you to be put into situations with someone else and have like attack dog style conversations. But I know is the whole point of what you're trying to do.
Right.
And
in these hour chunks, I'm very good. Twitter's a whole other situation.
That's an example. I mean, so podcasts are like these different blocks of time that might enable forms of discourse that just wouldn't happen phenomenologically on a screen. I mean, I just gave a TED Talk about this. When you go to Facebook and you post something controversial, the menu being provided by Facebook is which key do you want to type, right? Versus maybe host a dinner tomorrow night and people get RSVP right there, and that's scheduling a block of time later, which would be more empowering for having a conversation about something controversial.
Yeah.
So you can think of that as not about productivity, it's not about happiness, but it's about what are the values for that like life activity. And that life activity is being able to talk about something controversial in an empowering way. So it's probably better to do that face to face.
Right.
Something like this than on a screen.
And yet everyone's doing it on a screen. And that's one of the things, when I have talked about this, I see this all the time. People email me all the time, I posted something that I thought was pretty basic or centrist on Facebook, and now my brother won't talk to me, and my cousin's angry at me, and all these things. So these things I'd like to think that the original reason most of these things were made was to connect us. And yet I think we've turned a corner now where, yes, there's a lot of good there. We know these things can create revolutions in other parts of the world and all that. But I do think we're starting to turn a corner into where the social interactions are becoming more destructive than positive. I don't know if it's 50-50 or maybe it's not quite more than.
Well, and because it's so nuanced and complex, it leaves people throwing up their hands and saying like, well, social media seems to be ruining democracy, but I get all these benefits from it. It's complicated, so let's just like assume that it's never going to change and we're stuck with what we have.
Yeah.
Versus asking in a more critical way, when are the kinds of, let's say, having rich, meaningful, open-minded conversations about controversial topics, when is that happening on social media? I mean, after I did this thing with Sam Harris, someone pointed us to this Reddit thread. There's a Reddit thread channel called, I think, Change My Mind or something like that, or Change My Mind. And that has a whole channel dedicated to people's minds being open and changed and having conversations in a way that appears to be working. But if you were to rate, Facebook threads for that same thing, it's like doesn't turn out so well.
Right.
But then knowing that, wouldn't we want to diagnose what specifically goes wrong in the feed to have conversations about controversial topics? And then Facebook, if it had like a team of nonviolent communicators and political theorists and constitutional scholars asking like, well, what are like the best conversations that are best for people?
Yeah.
They could imagine steering people towards a totally different block of time, which might be, again, that host a dinner, the host a dinner button's right underneath that article, and you could just say, let's talk about it in person.
Would the ultimate irony be, though, that this, what we're doing right this second, 2 feet away from each other, really is the only way to truly do it in like a completely holistic way? Because even when I do these interviews on Skype, so it's someone I like and respect and know about and I'm engaged with, there is simply a difference in the interaction than there is when you're sitting right next to somebody.
So there's that. There is a difference in any mediated versus non-mediated forms of communication. But I think there's also something to say for people's capacity to do it. I think that's what you and Sam and Eric, I know Weinstein as well, talk about is like people have to have the ability to say what would convince me otherwise. As much as I'm convinced, and I would be so frustrated if someone's speaking from a perspective that's just so obviously wrong, to be able to do that seal manning move, like, well, what's the best possible argument for your position? And that's something that someone would have to be willing to do. So even face-to-face doesn't automatically enable someone with this capacity to do steel manning.
Right.
But that would be something you might want to build into mediated forms of communication. Being imagine next to the Facebook button, next to comment is like, well, what's the best possible version of what they're saying? As your first response. I mean, just imagine that would like tweak little bits of conversations that are happening a billion times a day.
Yeah. So I think we need some more of that. And then, of course, this is exactly what you're working on. What kind of traction do you feel like you're getting, sort of, just generally speaking? Like, you've had a couple nice, as you said, the TED Talk and going on Sam's podcast. So there's obviously some movement here, but then also related to the companies themselves.
Well, I think the hard part first is getting to the point where we can admit that there's a problem. I think there's a lot of times in history when there was a problem, but we didn't have an economic transition from it yet. And until there was an economic transition from, say, advertising, we can't admit that there is a problem with advertising. So what I've found is this is resonating like crazy. I think the world feels like they're being gaslit, and the technology companies are not saying, like, that they are shaping our attention and making these choices for us. Not that they're responsible or they're evil or they're manipulative. That's not what this is about. But just that the race for attention is kind of driving us crazy.
Yeah.
It's driving us crazy individually, but like our minds are just polluted. And then, democratically, the conversations we're having, like just to admit that that is in fact happening. So that response from culture at large is very, very positive. I just did 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper talking about this stuff, and the response has been incredible. That's one step. I think there's also a recognition slowly within companies that this is really a problem. And part of their ability to see it's a problem is that people need to be speaking up and saying, yeah, this is really happening to me. And they have to be emailing their friends at tech companies saying, like, yeah, this is really happening. I don't think there's a way for them to transition yet, because they have to be able to say, this is how it would work otherwise, differently.
Right.
People aren't even thinking that way, because the only way to think right now is what's going to get more of people's attention.
Yeah.
Like, it's not, no one's ever thought, like, what would just be best for Dave?
Right.
Like, just like the best screen for him right now.
Right.
Imagine I have no other interest. It's like, oh, you're just lonely. Let me like help you get out with your friends.
Right.
I can totally help you. I have all this data. I know exactly who else is lonely right now.
Yeah.
But I've never been in a task where I'm just focused on like what's best for people.
Yeah.
So that's part of what I'm trying to teach with Time Well Spent is there's a different way to design stuff that is a totally different discipline of just asking what's the timeline that's like best for this person at this moment.
Yeah.
Whether it's a conversation they want to have, or they're lonely on a Tuesday night, or whatever.
Not to go too depressing with this, but in a weird way, aren't you battling something that can't be won at some level? Like the technology will just keep going. Like even if a lot of people get on board with this, hopefully people watch this and go, yeah, maybe I need a little less screen time, or I need to be a little more aware, or whatever it is. But that the technology is just going to keep coming. And even if you eventually got Google to change a few things, and you got Twitter to change the mentions and a few things, that just the onslaught of this stuff, there's so much of it now. Yeah. There are obviously people with bad intentions. There are people with good intentions that still accidentally do bad things. All that stuff. That it's like you're trying to take a principled position sort of against technology as it's like, the wave of technology just hits us endlessly.
Well, what's interesting is at the end of the day, the people who make it are all human beings. Like, and so back to persuasion, we're all just people who are persuaded by different things. I think that as people see the costs of this on their own children. No one wants to live in this world that we're creating. Like, there's just no human being who's excited to live in a world where the screens are optimized to make it hard to have conversations about democracy. Not intentionally, but unintentionally. No one wants to live in a world where their own kids get hooked to doing something that developmentally stunts them. No one wants that.
Yeah, I would just say the human connection. Like, to me, that's the broader part here. It's just crushing the actual human connection.
Yeah. But I mean, in terms of this David and Goliath thing, it's like the more that we tap into a relationship of my actions designing the screen this way are causing this specific result in society for this tiny little thing. And I didn't intend to do it, and we're not blaming you for doing it, but just to see that there is a link, that if I'm, by designing the choice menu this way, I'm creating that outcome. And that I can see where if I designed it this other way, it would create a positive outcome. People have to see that that is even possible too. Because right now everyone is so trapped in like this worldview of like maximizing attention and engagement that they can't even imagine what the other thing would be like.
Right, they're trying to maximize attention, and yet we're crushing attention through that, which is fascinating. Have you ever thought that maybe the next step with all of this would be that you would have to be part of building a new device altogether?
Yeah, I mean, so the unfortunate truth is that like, if you think of this as there's a city that all like 1 billion people are like jacked into, like the Matrix.
There's a very Matrix theme around all of this, that we're the batteries for these companies. This thing,
yeah. And again, no evil things. Just that's the business model. So we're all batteries in the system, but it's colonized our own mind. I think something very deep and even deeper than that, identity and anyway.
No, we can go there too.
Yeah, no, it's something very, very perverted, right? It's really, deeper into the brainstem is identity. Deeper into the brainstem is, it's not just behavior. It's not just feeling a little more distracted. Well,
wait, let's pause there for a second, because I think there's something interesting there. Like, I even see, like, I'm pretty tolerant of trolls online.
Right.
They can annoy the hell out of me when I see that they derail a conversation that I think is really interesting. But to me, it's like, a lot of it sucks if you're just anonymously creating 80 accounts and just fighting with everybody and all that. But like the troll culture is something that I do understand. It's people just having fun and annoying people and whatever. And it's just, more than anything else, it just seems like it's part of being human. So that's just, the more we peer into this thing, we're sort of just peering into ourselves, right?
We're peering into ourselves, but the question is, are there like little viral coefficients or amplifiers and upregulators and downregulators? And so you can imagine a version of Facebook newsfeed that knows who the trolls are and then hits a big upregulator, just like dials them way up. And so now you're looking at the troll feed.
Right.
And it's just like the maximum trolling. Every story that gets posted, there's the first comment is someone being like, just totally trolling you. And just noticing what phenomenological experience would that create in people versus another version of Facebook where it just downregulates all of those trolls, and there's just like no trolls anywhere you go. They actually could create both of those feeds.
Right.
But we'd have to have a conversation about.
So we need a troll dial basically, and you can up it sometimes if you want to have that, and you can down it sometimes.
And that's another question. Is like at the end of the day, I could give a user like 1 million dials, and at some point there's a sort of necessary paternalism of the Facebook designer saying, look, whether we want to or not, we're bumping our elbows into people either having a lot of trolls or like a less trolls. So we have to decide. But right now it's actually all unconscious. So the Facebook newsfeed, for example, and this is the whole filter bubble thing, it learns what you click on that confirms your worldview, and without even knowing it, it sort of persuades you more and more with your worldview. Because if they had a choice between the confirm your worldview feed and the world is way more complicated and very different than what you think it is feed, like no one would spend time on the world's complicated and difficult feed. Like people would get burnt out and say, I'm not going to use Facebook anymore.
I probably would, but I think it's...
Right, but it would require values. You have to value that because it would actually require patience. It would require dealing with complexity, reading, like using word choices that are unfamiliar to you. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that would be harder about living in that world.
So I did a video a couple weeks ago on how I think internet culture is leaking into real culture. And I think you've sort of hit this in the political thing, where now we cater a news feed to ourselves. Our own opinions are constantly reinforced. We then defriend people who don't back us on those things. Everyone else is evil and all that stuff. And now I think we see this now leaking out into politics. There's a certain way that politicians talk now. Obviously, this has a lot to do with Trump. How everything... This controlled thing that was just on our phones and our laptops is now leaking out to society. Do you see that as like a new piece of this?
Well, I think we've always been infected by things. Like consumerism is that our desires actually became the desires of advertisers. So like we're just like walking around pursuing lifestyles and images that we saw on television growing up. And I think, so that's always a carryover from, lots of mediated experiences, getting kind of, washed in things, and then suddenly, walking out the door and not being in front of a television and still wanting all these things that we didn't want. So I think it's a necessary byproduct, and we have to see that humanity is so persuadable then to ask, what would be the persuasive world you want to live in? Because right now, the politically persuasive world is persuading us to understand each other less, to want to move away from anybody we don't understand.
Yeah.
And actually, physically, just spatially, they're further away. If you wanted to have a conversation with someone who disagreed with you, you'd probably have to drive like a little while, right?
We could probably find somebody over here.
Probably could find somebody.
I think we could find somebody. What are some of your habits as you've become aware of this stuff? How much did it change? I suspect years ago when you were at Google and you were working on this stuff, you were probably on this thing pretty close to 24 hours a day.
The worst part is because I know about all these techniques, I'm constantly, when I find myself falling into a trap, I'm like, damn it. Like
it got you.
That's the thing about persuasion. So I've studied from all of these different disciplines. There's a lab actually at Stanford called the Persuasive Technology Lab. And I learned all these techniques. And what I found is everybody in the field of persuasion, whether it's like these dark marketing conferences or these persuasion experts or the behavioral economists like Daniel Kahneman, they'll say that even though these are like the world experts on what pushes our buttons, you're still human.
Right.
Like you can't escape it. Like this is just how you work.
Right.
And this is the magic insight too, that sleight of hand magic works on every single mind, no matter how smart you are, no matter what language you speak, no matter what culture you come from. Like it's a feature of how your mind works. I mean, the whole bup, 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 right? Like just it happens to you. So in terms of how I, live this stuff, I'm just more aware of all the stuff as it's doing stuff to me. And what I then try to do is sort of meta design the environment so that there's fewer of the things that persuade me in ways I don't like. So that's like turning off notifications, launching apps by typing, which forces you to make a conscious choice, as much as possible going through direct doorways. So for example, do you use an iPhone?
I do.
Okay, so when you open an iPhone and you want to write yourself an email, you probably like scroll over to the app and then open it, and then you see the long list of new email, and you wait a couple seconds because you want to see if anything came in, and then you're probably going to hit the new email button, but maybe some new email just came in that now your mind is thinking about something else and you forget what you were doing. What you can do instead is type from the very beginning of the screen, swipe down, type MA for mail to show up,
and then go right,
and then hold on to, don't even go into it, hold on to, like hard press into it if you have a new iPhone, hard press into it. It shows you a sub-menu where you can say new message. And so when you open up mail, you're going like direct pathway. So there's just no detours along the path between like my mind wanting to do something and then getting to do it.
Yeah.
But you can imagine that instead of that being on your shoulders to adopt that habit, like Apple and Google could make that built into how all this stuff works.
Yeah, which if they really wanted to help us be functional,
they would do that.
And actually in certain ways more efficient, because a lot of times you have an important email to send and then you've gone off on that detour, now you're looking at 6 other things and you can't even remember to look at the original.
And it's not like companies are profiting from that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's important to say, like, just with email, for example, no Google or Apple is making money when you check email and nothing's there.
Right.
It's not like they're profiting. This is not something that they're going to lose money. So this is just a matter of whether or not they take responsibility that there is a design solution and they could fix it. If you really understand how people work, it's like we're so predictable. Like at any given moment in time, we're kind of picking from an invisible menu of things that occur to us to be doing. And like right now, if you just snap your fingers wherever you are listening to this or watching this, like there's a certain menu that's available to you about what you're doing. Probably you're just going to continue listening or watching. But if there was ever like a moment of just boredom, or if we just stopped talking for the next 15 seconds, like for a moment, people would probably be like, I wonder if I should check. Because your phone puts a new choice on life's menu at any single moment that's going to taste sweeter than reality. Like it outcompetes being there with yourself on a toilet. Like, you could just be there and be uncomfortable and just have nothing to do. But that is not, that's going to be totally outcompeted. There's a sweeter option on the menu now to then catch up on something. You could be more productive, you could be stimulated, you could tweet, you could learn something. I mean, you could, even productive, positive things, not just amusing things.
Right.
So we would have to be willing to give up something if we weren't going to check our phone in that moment. That you'd have to be able to say, yeah, I could like get back to that last text message. And if you didn't respond, you'd be giving up something.
Yeah.
And that's what we'd have to, people have to see that that's the trade that they would be making.
So when I first heard you on Sam's podcast a couple weeks ago, his last book was basically about mindful meditation and
Waking up.
Yeah. Inner peace without religion in his case. But for our purposes, whether it's through religion or meditation or whatever it is, are we just losing that? Mm-hmm. When you're describing that to me, it's like, I always think it's funny, like if you're meeting a friend somewhere and you have to stand on a corner for 1 minute, you will always look at your phone the whole time. I will try not to now, but like the default is you're standing somewhere and instead of, even if you're in a town you've never been to, looking at different people, looking at the restaurants, you just go to this thing.
And I think it's important to ask, to be fair to the techno optimists here, like, which is actually best for you? Like in that moment, there's sort of you, and then there's this like invisible block of time, which is what you do for the next 10 seconds. Like if we're just asking like, what's best for Dave in that one moment, would it be for you to look up and just be people watching? Or would it be to like get back to that last other 2 text messages that you wanted to get back to?
Right.
And it's not clear that like looking up and just people watching is like automatically better. Like just to play the kind of, not to fall into the naturalistic fallacy that, things were just better before when we were just bored all the time.
Right, and I don't buy that, but I think for someone like me that's in this stuff all the time, I cherish those moments.
You need that, exactly.
Now. Yeah.
And that knowing that, because we do also know something about, when people spend just a lot of time on a screen, one of the things with time well spent that we're doing is we have these ratings of, given how much time you spent per app in general on the screen, how much screen time per app is like a happy amount and which is like the unhappy amount.
Right.
We find is the unhappy amount is about 2.4 times the happy amount. Meaning like I think it's like 26 minutes on Facebook is like okay, but if you're on there for 60 minutes, everyone unilaterally says like this is like not good.
Right.
And so it's telling us something about like, if your phone asked you what's time well spent for you using me, like, and if just in your breaks, knowing that you're a kind of person who uses it all the time, it would maybe help you give some feedback before you're about to check it in that street corner and make it easier for you to not do that.
Yeah. What else can we do? What else, in our remaining time here, let's only work on the positives. What else can we do to give people more time well spent? Yeah, and just control over this. So for the people that are out there that are watching this right now that have just completely lost control, because that's the main group we got to get to first, right?
Yeah. So one of the things is on the Time Well Spent website, we have some tips. There's this whole take control section. And I have no book here. I'm not consulting. I'm not selling anything, just to be clear. We're just trying to help people. There's some things there. I think a few things you can do is, one, there's a difference between notifications from machines and notifications from people.
Yeah.
Most things that your phone buzzes for, even though it seems like it's from a person, it's actually from a machine. It's like your friend just posted on Facebook. That's from a machine. It's not from the person.
Yeah.
It's about a person, but it's actually being invented by a growth hacker, someone whose job is to build engagement as much as possible for Twitter or something, to find these new seductive things to throw at you, to pull you in. What we should do is turn off all of those notifications and just have it when a person wants your attention. Because that means if your phone buzzes, you know for sure that there's something worth maybe responding to.
Right. So in your ideal world, the company would listen to someone like you and just not even put that as the automatic default when you download.
But right now they can't do that because of the business model of advertising. They'd be losing attention market share because someone else is going to swoop in and grab it if they leave it on the table.
Right. So your solutions here are you're really at this point just trying to empower the people.
This example is just people.
Yeah.
So the first is just how do we have some band-aids to better our current situation. So one is turning off notifications. Another one is finding these direct pathways. Like another simple example is when you set your alarm, before going to bed, you can unlock your phone and go into it and find the alarm clock and do the whole thing. If you just swipe up, there's an alarm clock right there. Yeah. And that just means that you don't have to go in all the time. So the more you keep this keeping yourself locked out as much as possible, learning to use Siri when you're locked, these kinds of things are helpful. Another one is typing the name of the app. And then another one is setting a custom vibration for text messages. So like right now, if I get a text message from a person that's through iMessage on my phone, I actually have a custom vibration of like 3 quick buzzes, so that if your phone's just buzzing once, it could be like your house is on fire, or it could be like someone posted on Facebook.
Right.
And because you don't know, it puts you in this loop where you have to check all the time. If you have clarity, so that your phone buzzes in a very specific way with 3 quick buzzes, which you can set up, then you don't fall into that trap.
Yeah. Do you think that if people don't get on board a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, that we're going to have like a massive anti-technology movement? Because I think you see little bits of this. You know, we see like little camps where people are shutting down. I told you about me shutting down occasionally. But,
Right.
but
You do it twice a year?
Yeah, I've been trying twice a year. I did it, last time I did it was basically Christmas week. And actually the first time I did it, which I think was about a year ago, I got back and something that I had taped on the show right before, I had this interview with the actor Stephen Fry, and it caused like a real outrage thing, and it was on the cover of a lot of things in the UK, and I didn't hear about it for 10 days, and I had my agent and him and his people contact me, and but then I got back on, and then I was just slammed. Like I finally had a little like sense of decency and clarity,
and then the second you get back on, you're slammed.
I get in the Uber, and then
boom,
bang, it's all back.
It explodes in your face.
Yeah, so... But that being said, I'm glad that I did it, and I want to continue doing it. But what do you think about like a real anti-technology movement? Because I do sense that there's going to be at least some growth there.
I think the key thing here is not to make it a black and white issue. I think when we say like, oh, we should just like look up from our screens and like deal with the really discomfort of being human in the 21st century and all the stuff that's going on now. I mean, that's just unrealistic. But I do think. So the whole point of Time Well Spent is we need a design renaissance. We need to be able to ask, like, what is the sort of eudaimonic, human flourishing, like, amount of relationships we want to be having? Like, do we want to be texting back and forth with per day? When do we want to go to sleep? What are the, what is our short-term memory? What are these, like, finite limits of being alive as a human? And having your phone defend and honor each of those boundaries. Like, it should be on your team given the sort of dimensions of what a human life is, as opposed to just saying like, there are no boundaries, we're just going to blow past every barrier you try to put up because like every screen is going to autoplay the video into your head or something.
Right.
So we really do need a design renaissance. I think that in terms of where this is going, I think the first step is for people to see that the current design patterns are not on your team. Like I think people should feel a little bit of disgust and outrage, rightfully so, because their minds are being hijacked and that this stuff isn't an accident and it's a result of good, well-intentioned people who are simply having to fall into this race to the bottom to grab attention, and that we can all just see that we're being manipulated, and it doesn't feel good, and it's not helping democracy, and it's not helping like our inner lives. And I think that's the sort of like movement that needs to happen. That's the sort of anti-technology or new technology movement, or the sort of humane technology movement that we need.
Are you getting any pushback from the powers that be? Like, because it's sort of like you're doing a little bit of the, showing them Oz,
Yeah. I mean, I think that all I'm doing is saying things that are just factually true. I mean, nothing I've said is you can disagree with any of the facts. I think people have arguments on the shelf to pull out to say, well, I think net positive, the existing Facebook newsfeed is like a good thing for humanity.
Right.
There's all these little like one-liners that you can kind of throw at this, right? But at the end of the day, you could ask, couldn't we have a phone in our pocket that just works a lot better for like humans?
Yeah.
And we could. And could we have a news feed that's like a lot better for democracy? And we could. And could we have a news feed that's a lot better for like not promoting cyberbullying? And we could. These just would take very deliberate and conscious efforts to design it differently.
Right. So it sounds counter to business, but ironically, everything that you're presenting is a business opportunity, actually.
It could be a business opportunity if people saw that they were being sold garbage right now. Like they're kind of like the design patterns just are about manipulating as much as possible. And that's why I use the metaphor of the organic food movement. People had to first, until like 1970, like you're just eating food off the shelf. You have no idea that there's a difference between stuff that has whatever, some bad pesticides that we figure out later is like really bad for us. So first step is like, oh, there's some stuff that's not good for us and we don't want that. And people have to see that they unconsciously or without consent have been stuffed full of this stuff that's not really good for us. And that there's a clear way in which it's not good for us. Because right now people have had like missing language to describe like, I know something's not right, but I don't know what it is. And I'm hoping that with going out there, people see that the thing that's not right is this race for attention that's just going lower on the brainstem, and that's the thing that's not right. And so we would all want this other better thing.
So are you getting pushback from the powers that be?
So far, I think they're feeling the pressure more and more from things like 60 Minutes, because I think that was the first time that something like 13 million people, tuned in. But I'm really not trying to be out there bombastic and accusing anybody. I'm
not implying you are, but just the nature of anything is that you're saying there's something wrong here.
There's something wrong here, yeah. But at the end of the day, the other interesting thing is I'm friends with a lot of them. I mean, I'm from the industry. I had a tech company. We were talent acquired by Google. My friends started Instagram. These are all good people. Many of them are my friends. I'm just pointing out an honest problem with what the race for attention costs us and democracy.
Yeah. If you were a betting man, 10 years, have we done some of this stuff? I mean, have we?
We have to. Like, I literally don't see us surviving as a species if we don't solve the problem.
So I'm kind of on board that, but what does that really mean to you? Like, if we don't, where does this really take us?
I mean, I think, you know, I said this recently, like, I think that the most important problems in the world require people being able to coordinate and use their attention like the way they want to. Like, if you cannot control where your mind goes, you can't build, like, family relationships don't work. Development of human beings from children up to adulthood doesn't work if people's relationships are really shallow or they're distracted all the time. That's just like an existential threat to just how anyone in any culture, any language is going to be affected by this.
Yeah. Things
like, you know, global problems like climate change or other things require the ability to coordinate our attention. So, you know, democracy requires agreement and conversation and debate and the ability to talk about things that are really hard to talk about radioactive topics, and to do it in an open-minded way. If you can't get to the point where you have that conversation, the only other alternative is violence. So we either get there or we have violence, or we do some mixture model of the both, and we hopefully realize that we need this better system at the other end.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I mean, I knew I was going to enjoy this conversation, as I said to you when you walked in, but like it does, people ask me why do I do this show the way I do it? And it has so much to do with exactly what you're talking about.
Well, that's why I wanted to come on, because I, you know, and this is something I share with Eric Weinstein, who came on before, is we all see that some of the most important things in the world are these controversial things. We have to be able to talk about something that no one wants to talk about. And anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think that's what's...
No, but that's the funny thing is, like, I only do it this way because I wanted someone to do it. And I was like, why isn't anyone doing this? I guess I'll do it. I didn't know if it was going to work or not.
Right.
But in a way, that's the exact same premise that you're going off of here, is like somebody needs to just start doing this. So you're just talking about it, and hopefully some of these companies come around and start the pushback.
Yeah, and see that it's possible that, like, you know, that organize a dinner button could show up in a Facebook newsfeed. And what difference would that make in, like, little choices that people would make in their lives, as opposed to, you know, debating that thing on the screen versus showing up on Tuesday and, like, having a conversation that's more like this but in a distributed way.
Yeah. Is the ultimate irony of all this is that you have to do this digitally? You have to do this through a site, and we have to do this on YouTube, and I have to tweet this interview out later.
Totally.
We'll Instagram a picture of us, and
you know,
all of that stuff. Like,
you know, it's like with Time Well Spent as a movement and a nonprofit movement, and you know, we try not to maximize, like, oh, we hit like 1 million people today or something like that, but you know, it matters. And I think you have to have it matter to you, not in a way where you want to maximize it. You know, it matters to you that the message is getting out there and it's resonating. And then what's interesting, I think, is if you speak really truthfully and the message comes across, like the independent magnitude of like the thing that you're offering something different just automatically starts to spread.
Yeah. Well, I think it's cool and it's honest, which I think is something that's so lacking, and it makes sense why, you know, getting people off of some of this stuff so we can start having real conversations again is good. It's one of the reasons why people sometimes say, well, why don't you do shows 5 days a week? And it's like, well, because I also know you got a life to live. You know what I mean? Like, if you give me 2 hours, we usually post 2 interviews a week. If you give me 2 hours of your time a week, if you give me 20 minutes of your time, that's pretty good. And so that's what I think we need more of. So I'll help you somehow if you want some help.
Yeah, totally.
I hope this offers some help, but I'd love to figure out some other ways that I can be part of this.
Totally. I mean, we're actually in the early processes of sort of formalizing, you know, the strategy for how we're going to do this. I recently met some really good, powerful folks who are going to help. You know, there's a lot of people, I would say, in the industry who used to play this game, and they understand how it works, and they made a lot of money from it at some point, and now they're like, I see this. I mean, a lot of the election was like run by outrage news feeds and fake sensationalism, if not fake news, and advertising where you can pay to reach a susceptible audience, which is a real, true thing. Forget Cambridge Analytica. If I pay Facebook, I can target that specific pool of people with a lie. Like, all I have to do is pay. And there's no way Facebook can regulate that, because whoever pays them the most gets to walk in the door. They 100 million times a second. It doesn't have a way of saying, I look at your intentions and your eyes squinting in a weird way as you persuade them, right?
Right.
So anyway, I think people are slowly seeing at a human level what it's costing all of us, and that they want to help. And I'd love to talk to you about ways we could, get more help. I mean, this is literally one of those things that has to be, out there for everybody, and in a big way.
All right, great. Well, you guys obviously should check out Time Well Spent and check out Tristan's website, which is tristanharris.com. Is it? You always say Tristan, right?
Tristan, yeah.
I 20 times today I had to say it's not Tristan, it's not Tristan, it's Tristan. tristanharris.com.